Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome inside Studio 34. This is the FanDuel Hurry Up. I am Greg Sussman, joined today by our own Frank Stanfill, who's here to help you win your fantasy championships. That's right. Fantasy playoffs have arrived. What's happening, Frankie?
Not much, Greg. Excited for the fantasy playoffs here in season-long leagues. The time is now. We have to hit on these waiver wire pickups heading into Week 14. How's everything going with you?
Things are going well, man. I have a couple of playoffs, and I'm ready to win. And that's why I'm going to pick up all the Dolphins. That's right, all the Dolphins. And it starts at the top with their quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick, in what is one of like 10 revenge games this guy has around the NFL. He has one this weekend against Adam Gase, baby, and the New York Jets.
Yeah, we thought the Jets were one of the hottest teams in the league, and then they turned back into the New York Jets. Thank you, Adam Gase. But Ryan Fitzpatrick is in another good spot here going up against this Jets defense. He has started the last 7 games for the Dolphins. He has 4 top 10 QB finishes in fantasy football over that span. Just coming off a game in Week 13 against the Eagles where he threw for 365 yards, 3 touchdowns. Of course, he'll throw an interception here or there, but the volume has been there for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Over 37 passing attempts per game since Week 7. He has 3 rushing touchdowns during that span as well, because the Dolphins defense, also very bad. They allow him to get into a lot of shootouts. They're allowing a league-high 31.4 points per game. So I'm expecting a little bit of points back and forth here. Sam Darnold was not good this past week, but should be able to bounce back against the Dolphins. So we get some back and forth. Ryan Fitzpatrick is airing it out. The volume is there for him. And last time he faced the Jets, he threw for 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I'm expecting another solid performance. I know it's crazy in your fantasy playoffs, but he is a legit streaming quarterback in Week 14.
I know it's weird, but you're right, Frank. When Ryan Fitzpatrick is on, he's the gunslinger. He is never afraid to throw it down the field. And against the Jets, he's going to have every opportunity. 5 consecutive scoring drives this past Sunday in a win against Philadelphia. Miami, they're hot, and so is Ryan Fitzpatrick. But if you don't want to go with Fitzmagic, I get it. You want to go with a different quarterback. You want to potentially target a defense we've been targeting all year in fantasy football. That's what brings us to Jacoby Brissett. The Colts are facing off against Tampa Bay Buccaneers and a secondary that has been, well, brutal. While Brissett hasn't been great, the matchup doesn't really get much better.
Yeah, the matchup doesn't get better, Greg, but I want to start off with Jacoby Brissett. You mentioned that he hasn't been good since returning from injury, averaging just 198.7 passing yards per game with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions over his last 3 games. The problem is, I don't know that the Colts are going to be able to run the ball here against Tampa Bay. We know that they want to run the football. They have the 4th highest rush percentage in the NFL, but Tampa Bay is number 1 in run defense DVOA, so I think that they're going to have to air it out a little bit here with Jacoby Brissett. This Bucs defense, they look like they have been turning it around a little bit the past couple of weeks. They've limited Matt Ryan. They got Nick Foles benched at halftime in Week 13. We got Minshew Mania back in that game. But ultimately, I'm still not trusting it. Tampa Bay is allowing the 2nd most passing yards per game, just over 305 per game. The 2nd most passing touchdowns per game at 2.36. So I think Brissett is going to be in a position here where, yes, they will try to run. Perhaps they get Marlon Mack back in this game, but I don't know how much success they're going to have. And I know that they can throw on this team with Zach Pascal, maybe T.Y. Hilton if he can return. Jack Doyle just had a big game as well. I think that Jacoby Brissett is good for 250 to 275 passing yards in this game and 2 touchdowns, which will put him right in the discussion as a low-end QB1 or, a streaming quarterback right around that range, 49.5 total in this game, according to the FanDuel Sportsbook. So we're expecting some points. If you don't want to trust Fitzpatrick, I think Jacoby Brissett's the next guy up.
Like I said, the matchup, it doesn't get better. This week, you want to make sure you make the right decision, whether it's Fitzmagic or it's Brissett. Frank, the question that people want to know is, are they better than Matt Ryan?
Well, Matt Ryan's going up against the Carolina Panthers, Greg, and I'm happy that you're asking this question. I assume that it's for your team, but I will go back to Matt Ryan in the spot because that Panthers defense has been quite dreadful.
It's not about me, Frank. It's about the people, and the people are very happy with your answer. Let's move on to the running back position where we go right back to the Miami Dolphins, who are now down to their 4th-string running back on the season. Gone is Kenyon Drake. Gone is Kalen Ballage. I feel like I missed another one somewhere. Mark Walton, that's who it was. Now we're up to Patrick Laird. Patrick Laird, the Dominator. Had a good game this past week against the Eagles. Can he do it again against the Jets?
Well, I wouldn't quite call Patrick Laird a dominator.
Dominator!
But maybe he can keep it going against the New York Jets. I've noticed that Patrick Laird has been very popular amongst the DFS community the past couple of weeks over on Twitter. But maybe we can bring some of this success over to the season-long community as well. And I'm looking at opportunity here. You mentioned the injury to Kalen Ballage. He left in Week 13 with a non-contact leg injury. It's not sounding good for Kalen Ballage as of now. And Patrick Laird wound up playing 42 offensive snaps, 5 as a wide receiver. That was a season high for Patrick Laird in this game against the Philadelphia Eagles. He finished with his best Kalen Ballage impersonation as he possibly can. Just 5 yards on 10 rushing attempts. He did have a rushing touchdown, but he added 4 receptions for 42 yards on 5 targets. And I think that that's where they can really utilize the skill of Patrick Laird. He had 96 receptions over his final 2 seasons at the University of California. So we know that he does have that in his skill set. He is a good pass catcher. They lining him up outside as a wide receiver at times. I think that they are going to utilize him in that way. I think they realize they can't run the football. They are the worst team in the NFL in terms of yards per carry on the season. They're averaging just 3.1 yards per carry. I think they use Patrick Laird as an extension of the run game with some short passes, and I think it makes a lot of sense as well. The Jets have been tough against the run, so I'm not expecting him to do a lot on the ground here in terms of his rushing yardage and even his rushing touchdowns, but as a receiver, I think that he can be utilized in that way. And assuming Kalen Ballage is out, I think Patrick Laird is in play as a PPR flex heading into Week 14.
I think Patrick Laird's a fine flex option. Again, now opportunity doesn't always create production, but in this case, against the Jets defense, that's simply not very good. The opportunity is there for Laird, who showed something against Philly. Maybe Dominator was a bit extreme, but hey, we'll see what happens on Sunday. Now let's go to our favorite game of ping pong, Frank, which brings us to Tampa Bay, where we've told you, hey, you may want to pick up Peyton Barber. And then we're like, no, Ronald Jones is your guy. And then I think we mixed in some Daria Gumbawale at some point, went back to Peyton Barber. We've been really talking about freeing Rojo. You've apologized to other people at this network about, hey, you were wrong about Rojo. And here we are with the playoffs on the line, Week 14, and you're going back to Peyton Barber, Frank.
Ping pong no more, Greg. This is like a professional ping pong player going up against you playing ping pong, Greg. I'm done with Ronald Jones. It's officially over. Hashtag free Peyton Barber. That's right. You heard it here first. But seriously, we've got to talk about Peyton Barber based on what he did yesterday. Did not run efficiently. He gave you the best Peyton Barber that he possibly can. 17 rushing attempts for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. But he's being used in the red zone, and there were comments made after the game yesterday by Bruce Arians that said he's going to continue to ride the hot hand like he has said all season long. But specifically, something he said about Ronald Jones missing a blitz pickup yesterday and said, quote, when that happens, you don't get to play anymore. So Ronald Jones is in the doghouse, and it's a solid matchup going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 14. Derrick Henry just ran for 149 yards and a touchdown, although it seems like he does that against anybody he wants nowadays. I think that you can run against the Indianapolis Colts. I understand, this has been a ping pong game, Greg. It's been Ronald Jones, then it's been Peyton Barber, but he just saw the second highest snaps, 29, and the second highest carries of the season, 17 in Week 13. So I think they are relying on him right now. I think you can run against the Indianapolis Colts, and I think that Peyton Barber is back in the flex discussion once again heading into Week 14.
For now, the ping pong game is over, but who knows what will happen this time next week, Frank. We're putting out more videos and talking about freeing Rojo again. But for now, Peyton Barber finding the end zone, getting the opportunity, and we've seen what he can do with opportunity in the past. Against the Indianapolis Colts, it's a fine start. Peyton Barber, because why the hell not? Let's get to the wide receivers, Frank, and that brings us to Anthony Miller. Now, we talked about Anthony Miller last week. I don't know if it was on the air or off the air, quite frankly, but Miller had the major opportunity without Taylor Gabriel in the lineup, and he showed up against Detroit on Thanksgiving Day. This week, this Thursday in particular, he faces off against the Dallas Cowboys. Miller is one of Trubisky's favorite guys last week. Can he be one of his favorite guys this week?
Yeah, I think he can, Greg. And I know it seems like ages ago, but let's travel back to Thanksgiving where Anthony Miller had a monster game, 9 receptions for 140 yards on 13 targets. The usage has been great for Anthony Miller. Over the past 3 games, he has at least 9 targets in each of those. 26% target share, leads the team with 21 receptions and 271 receiving yards. I really like this matchup, too, going up against the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas is typically good against outside wide receivers, but look at what slot receivers have done against them over the past 2 games. Julian Edelman, 2 games ago, had 8 receptions for 93 yards, and we all saw on Thanksgiving Cole Beasley in the revenge game dominate, just like I said he would. 6 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. 78% of Anthony Miller's snaps this season have come in the slot. So I think he can take advantage against the Dallas Cowboys. They're going to have to put up some points against this Cowboys team that is desperate on Thursday Night Football this week, and I think that they're going to be able to do that with Anthony Miller.
Miller was somebody I drafted early. Miller was somebody I drafted higher than I probably should have because I thought he could be a breakout year. And the shoulders injuries persisted. Taylor Gabriel persisted. It didn't work out. But maybe I was just a year off, and he'll end the season on a high. Let's see. He started it last week in Detroit on a Thursday. Let's see if he can continue it against Dallas this week. Up next, we go back to Indianapolis, where Zach Pascal is like the only guy left standing there with the Colts. T.Y. Hilton re-injured himself again. We know the Colts are playing Tampa Bay, as we discussed earlier. Eric Ebron's down. Chester Rogers hurt himself too. Pascal, not only is he the last guy left, but he's actually pretty good.
Yeah, he has been pretty good and has developed a rapport with Jacoby Brissett over the course of the season. There has been some inconsistency, but we've seen in games where T.Y. Hilton has missed that Zach Pascal does have big upside. And if we like Jacoby Brissett this week as a streaming quarterback against the Tampa Bay Bucs secondary, then we have to like his pass catchers. I love Jack Doyle as a must-start tight end moving forward, but Zach Pascal is not owned in enough leagues, especially in this matchup against Tampa Bay. In Week 13, this past week, Zach Pascal played a season-high 70 offensive snaps. He led the team with 7 receptions, 109 yards on 10 targets. The 10 targets represented a 25% target share. He saw 39% of the Colts' air yards as well, so he was being targeted down the field. Tampa Bay is allowing the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, the most targets, the most receptions per game as well to the position. So I think that he is in a position to succeed here. We don't know the status of T.Y. Hilton as of now, but personally, I would be surprised if T.Y. Hilton is returning in Week 14. He strained his calf again during practice leading up to Week 13. He was ruled out for that game early on in the week. I would be surprised if he plays, and if he doesn't, Zach Pascal makes for a very, very good play against this Bucs defense.
I think Pascal's an awesome play if there's no T.Y. Hilton this week. You're going to see all Pascal. You're going to see all Jack Doyle because that's the only players that Jacoby Brissett trusts that are left in this Colts offense. Rely on them. Naheem Hines as well. But Pascal, who's out there in so many waiver wires, he's a top target in an offense that should be able to move the ball against Tampa Bay on Sunday. One last Dolphin to get to, Frank, and that's at the tight end position where I have sat in this chair many weeks and said, hey, Mike Gesicki is terrible. I don't care what the measurements say. I don't care what the peripherals say. I don't care what the data says. My eyes tell me he is awful. And for the first 11 weeks of the season, I was right. But now we've hit Week 12 and 13, where Gesicki has scored touchdowns in back-to-back games. He had the best game of his career this past week against Philly with those over 70 yards receiving, 5 receptions, and yes, another touchdown. Gesicki's a major part of this offense, and ever since Preston Williams has gone down, he's the number 2 option after Devontae Parker. Gesicki, in a season that has been full of tight end turnover, he's been reliable the last couple of weeks, and probably as reliable as we head into the fantasy playoffs.
You hit on a lot there, Greg, and I'm happy you brought up that you didn't like Mike Gesicki, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Back-to-back games with a touchdown for Gesicki, finished with 5 receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets in Week 13 against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's now had at least 5 games in a row with 6 targets, 17% target share during that span, 21% of the air yards, and is tied for second on the team during that time period with 4 red zone targets. This started back in Week 9, if you remember, Greg, and his opponent? That's right. It was the New York Jets who he faces off against in Week 14. He caught 6 of 6 targets in that game for 95 receiving yards. The Jets just allowed C.J. Uzomah to have 5 catches for 51 yards. He should have had a touchdown too, but he doesn't know how to catch the ball. Mike Gesicki does know how to catch the ball, so he'll be doing a lot of that in Week 14. Devontae Parker is the guy on this team. There's no doubt about that. But outside of him, they don't really have anyone else to throw the ball to, so I do think that Gesicki is in play here against the New York Jets. Greg, is it fair to say that you owe Gesicki and the Gesicki squad, a.k.a. me, an apology this week?
Frank, I apologize. Not for choosing Matt Ryan over Ryan Tannehill, where I was right, despite your suggestion last week, but for killing Mike Gesicki for 11 weeks straight. Now, ready and willing to ride the hot hand, which leads me to Gesicki. Unless I want to go in a different direction, which brings me to Jason Witten, who hasn't been flashy. And if you ask a Cowboys fan, hasn't even really been good. But he's been good enough for fantasy owners that are desperate at the tight end position. And Witten this week on a Thursday against Chicago, well, people may be desperate enough.
They might just be desperate enough. You're right, Greg. Witten got back in the end zone on Thanksgiving. 6 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown in a really tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills, who are allowing the fewest fantasy points to tight ends this year. They allowed the fewest fantasy points to tight ends last year. So he actually took advantage of a tough matchup, and now he's going up against the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are actually really tough on outside wide receivers. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers so far this season, but you can take advantage of them with the tight end. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. They've allowed the 4th most receptions to tight ends this season. So I'm not sure that Gallup and Amari Cooper will be able to have the same amount of success that they've had all season long. I think Jason Witten is in play because of that. I think the matchup is a solid one. You're right, Greg. He is not a sexy pickup by any means, but the targets have been there for him recently, a 16% target share over the past 5 games. It's a good matchup for him. If you don't want to trust Mike Gesicki, I think Jason Witten is in play as a stream.
We got Jack Doyle right last week, and maybe one of these tight ends will be right this week. And when you look at it on face value, Gesicki's the guy over Jason Witten. As much as I don't want to say it, it's true. If Gesicki's not out there, you don't get him on the waiver wire. You go with Jason Witten. Well, let's be honest. Gesicki's been more consistent. It's a better matchup. He's the guy. I know I never thought I'd say it, but it's true. Mike Gesicki was the guy at the tight end spot. When it comes to the defense, I think there are some options out there for you to choose from. Frank, you really like the Tennessee Titans, though, this Sunday. How come?
I think it's a combination of the Titans' defense playing really well so far this season. I don't think that they're an elite defense by any means, but being coached by Mike Vrabel, they're a bend-but-don't-break defense, and they've been very opportunistic so far this year. They're going up against an Oakland Raiders offense in Week 14 that has struggled big time. Over the past 3 weeks, they're averaging just 9.7 real-life points per game. And Tennessee, as I mentioned, they've been opportunistic. They're getting to the quarterback. They have at least 3 sacks in 4 of their last 5 games. They're coming off a game where they just had a special teams touchdown against their division rivals, the Indianapolis Colts. I mentioned the struggles of the Oakland Raiders offense. Derek Carr just has 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions over those last 3 games. So I think it's a combination of things. The fact that Derek Carr and this Raiders offense is not playing well, and the fact that this Tennessee Titans defense has been really opportunistic so far this season. So I'm going back to the well. I know that we've been able to stream them at times this year, and I think that they're in play once again in Week 14 against the Oakland Raiders.
Titans against Oakland's a good spot. I also like Indianapolis this week. We talked a lot about them against Tampa Bay. If they're out there, Jameis is going to throw the interceptions. It's just how many points will he score as well. Both AFC South teams are worth putting out there, but Frankie is going with Tennessee as his favorite streaming defense this week. That's going to do it for us here on the FanDuel Hurry Up. We appreciate you watching and all of your support all season long. We'll be back next week. Hopefully you are too, and you're still in your fantasy playoffs. Tomorrow, we pivot to basketball, NBA DFS with Tom Vecchio. Should be fun. Enjoy Monday Night Football tonight, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.